Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more.
Alex hailed from my hometown, a place we both yearned to escape but found ourselves drawn back to, lured by family, friends, and a burgeoning local industry. My name is Margaret, though most call me Peggy. Alex was 2 years ahead of me in school and had established himself as a numerical control programmer, thriving when I graduated with a sociology degree and a minor in psychology. I joined the staff at the local hospital, working with troubled teens, many of whom had unique appearances that reflected their struggles. I had gone out with Alex a few times before, but I always found him a bit self-absorbed. He was handsome, a track and field star with a well-toned physique, yet his ego seemed to precede him despite his modest height of about 5 feet 8 inches. Our paths crossed again at a square dance organized by the 4-H Club, and I noticed he had changed. He dressed better now, wore his hair longer, and still sported the earring and necklace from a past girlfriend. I still found him attractive, so when he asked me out, I thought, why not? Our first date went well. He had mellowed, shedding some of the high school arrogance I remembered. Still, I wasn't ready to rush things. I had my principles and wasn't about to jump into bed with him just yet. With my educational background, I felt capable of reshaping someone's perspective, so he didn't seem like a lost cause as a potential partner. After all, I had to consider his prospects for the future. As we dated more regularly, I noticed he was somewhat affectionate, which was a plus. However, his persistent ego left me feeling the need to bring him down a notch. He had a lot to learn about treating a woman right, often prioritizing his needs above mine. Neither of us lived at home anymore, which had its advantages except when I visited his place, where I often found myself cleaning. His bachelor pad was a disaster, a stark contrast to his mother's pristine home. You had to be cautious about what you consumed from his fridge, Yet, in this town, as I considered my options, he started to look like one of the better candidates, even though I knew I'd have to train him post-marriage. My mom had a saying, just because the horse proposes doesn't mean you can put a bridle on him. Though Alex hadn't asked yet, I sensed it was on the horizon. Reflecting on my parents, I realized my dad had been well trained over the years, often helping my mom with household chores, donning an apron when necessary. After several months, the proposal came. I had some doubts about my ability to handle it, but I accepted, and we had a small church wedding. Our honeymoon was underwhelming. Alex was once again focused solely on his own desires. I had anticipated this. Like any wayward dog, he required training and domesticating. I resolved that if it meant starting with the basics, I would get it done. In the following months, I experimented with various methods to tame him, with mixed success. While I tried to focus on his positive traits, he remained incredibly insensitive, barreling through life without pause. It became essential to find a way to adjust him. I consulted his mother, who shared valuable insights, though results were hit or miss. She recounted how she had initially encouraged Alex's father to help with chores, which evolved into Alex wearing an apron, something he eventually grew to appreciate since they lacked a dishwasher, and he often came home in office attire. I attempted the same strategy with Alex. It worked to some extent, but it lacked the impact I desired. At least he was willing to wear the apron. Alex had a couple of friends from work he liked to fish with, and among them was Taylor, who was a bit unconventional, definitely not the type I'd expect my rugged husband to associate with, but as they say, to each their own. I didn't dislike Taylor. If anything, he was overly polite and refined, more of a gentleman than I anticipated. Whenever he came over for dinner, he always offered to help, and needing the company, I started to relate to him almost like a girlfriend. That's when I realized he had a slightly effeminate side, but I didn't see this as a negative. In fact, I hoped some of his gentleness might influence Alex. If only it would happen. I longed for Alex to become a true partner who appreciated my perspective on life. Taylor was still a bachelor living just a couple of miles downriver from the local chemical plant. He appeared to be in his early 20s, though he looked younger. His dad worked with packaging machines at the plant, and they had a small farm of about 15 acres where they grew enough to sustain themselves, much of which his mom canned. She was always busy with canning. Over the next year, Taylor visited our apartment frequently. I encouraged Alex to invite him over, enjoying our conversations. Taylor was well-read and could discuss a wide range of topics, even women's interests like hair and fashion. Interestingly, as I got to know Taylor better, he seemed to become less of a guy and more androgynous. I wasn't sure if Alex noticed or if he simply didn't care, as they always had a great time together. It didn't matter much to me. I began to see Alex soften, adopting some of Taylor's gentler qualities without becoming fully effeminate. Maybe my wish was coming true. I wondered what was happening, especially since we often chatted about women's topics during commercial breaks of games or at the dinner table, and Alex didn't seem to mind anymore. We discussed hair care products and clothing, and although it initially annoyed him, he eventually warmed up to it, sometimes even joining our discussions. It felt odd but enjoyable. Alex had saved enough money over the past 2 years for a down payment on a house we liked, situated a bit upstream from Taylor. The land was fertile, about 10 acres, perfect for raising a steer and a hog. I was excited about gardening, too, given the rich soil. The house was elevated, though the fields would occasionally flood in spring. The chemical plant upstream, where Taylor's dad worked, produced various items, including animal feed and supplements for menopausal women. It was such a small operation that I doubted the FDA even knew it existed. They had a little company store that sold products at significant discounts, including prescription items that were damaged and sold at cost to recover expenses, seemingly without concern for consequences. For a small business, I was surprised by the variety of products they offered, and best of all, they were affordable, as many were factory seconds that couldn't be sold at retail prices. Being somewhat of a health enthusiast, I bought a lot of their supplements, benefiting from the low prices. We lived about half a mile down from the plant, and I figured the water they used was safe, especially with EPA regulations in place. It never bothered me. We didn't get sick, that's for sure. They held monthly tours of the plant, and being curious about manufacturing, I decided to attend one. It was fascinating, especially the pharmaceutical production area. The men there seemed quite effeminate, particularly those in their 20s, and the older they were, the more pronounced their curves became, though they did tend to gain weight like most people. I noticed that no one wore gloves or masks, reinforcing my suspicions about their lack of EPA compliance. The middle-aged men looked even more feminine, sporting noticeable bosoms and having lovely complexions and hair with little to no facial hair. Although I knew they were male, their appearances and behaviors screamed female. Their movements were fluid, with a gentle sway to their walk. This piqued my curiosity about Taylor. While he didn't work there, he lived downstream. I wondered about his dad's appearance, but despite passing through packaging, I had no idea who he was. The men at the plant looked slightly more masculine, but not by much. Our house didn't have a well. The stream water was so delicious that the previous owners had simply piped it to the house using a pump and a regular string filter to remove sediment and insects. They had updated the system with PVC, ensuring there was no rusty taste. The water tasted better than bottled, always nice and cold, even in summer, retaining all its minerals and lacking the chlorine found in town water. It was a fantastic setup, and the water was truly wonderful. Perhaps that's why Alex drank so much of it in iced tea and other beverages. Whenever you turned on a faucet, the pump activated. The same went for hot water. There was no storage tank. Instead, we had an instantaneous hot water heater that activated when the hot water faucet was turned on, saving propane by not keeping water hot unnecessarily. However, all the other houses near the stream relied on wells. Since there were no building codes or restrictions, we also had a retention pond instead of a septic tank, placed far enough from the house that the overflow drained into a field of fruit trees. I tapped into the line before it reached the filter or the house to create a connection to my garden area, adding a second pump there for irrigation. I was against using pesticides, yet my garden flourished. There are organic methods to deal with pests, such as using a weak solution of dish soap, spices, or tea. The vegetables thrived, especially the tomatoes, which are technically fruits. I made green tomato relish that Alex loved. It had a strong flavor, but he seemed to prefer bold tastes, enjoying robust meats like corned beef and hot sausage, and he absolutely loved the salsa I made from our tomatoes and bird peppers. We had lived there for about 6 months, and my garden was flourishing, measuring around 30 by 50 feet, along with a nice mound of ever-bearing strawberries. Caring for the house, garden, and Alex felt like a full-time job, and I was grateful I didn't have to work outside the home, although I spent plenty of time doing chores outdoors. I had begun training Alex on our wedding night, guiding him toward what brought me pleasure. Of course, he was primarily focused on his own satisfaction, and the concept of prolonged foreplay was foreign to him. I realized this needed to change, but I was uncertain how to approach it. Then, a light bulb went off regarding Taylor, his living situation, and what I'd observed at the chemical plant. I recalled some things I'd seen at the store, in the plant, and online, particularly the men in the pharmaceutical production area. I stumbled upon a website filled with unusual transformation stories, which piqued my interest. Some tales of women transforming their husbands into girls even stirred a little excitement in me. What a daring notion! But why was I intrigued? Could I do the same with my little Alexney? Was I truly capable of that transformation just to train him? I wanted to domesticate him, but how far was I willing to go? Would I actually find pleasure in changing my little husband? Perhaps. He had changed somewhat since moving into the house, no longer the wholly self-serving person he once was. I didn't know how or why, but he was gradually evolving, just not as quickly as I desired, and certainly not like the characters in those exciting stories. I wanted results, and just hanging out with Taylor wasn't enough to effect significant change. I was determined to make some adjustments to my husband's form and future. One day, I visited the company store and wrote down the names of their generic pharmaceuticals. Once I returned home, I connected to the internet to research what they were. After my previous readings and observations of the men at the plant, I had a good idea. Some of them seemed promising as training aids, and I decided to acquire a few. They were incredibly cheap, with some pills containing chips and some capsules slightly crushed. I didn't care. That didn't deter me at all. I felt a thrill at the prospect of what I was about to do to enhance Alex's disposition as I made my purchases. I made sure to stock up in case the plant shut down. From that modest beginning, I took the broken pills and opened the crushed capsules, mixing them in experimental ratios, grinding them back into powder with my coffee grinder and mortar and pestle. This way, the mixture would dissolve quickly in anything. I incorporated it into Alex's lunch meat sandwiches initially. My instinct told me that something spicy might not be ideal, so I avoided adding it to his coffee. With the strong flavors of the meats and Dijon mustard, he'd never suspect a thing, especially since the lettuce and tomatoes came from our garden. He had a hearty appetite and a fast metabolism, devouring an entire sandwich during both break times and another at lunch, allowing the doses to be spread throughout the workday. I hoped these would help temper his ego and encourage him to be kinder and more considerate. I must have been doing something right, though it took several more months for any noticeable changes. Maybe he wasn't getting enough of the mix. I really had no idea how much to give him at first. I should mention that I was the kind of girl who enjoyed being a bit sexy. Even though I had settled into the role of a farm girl, once my outdoor chores were finished, I loved to indulge in a nice soak and slip into something truly feminine before Alex got home. I didn't always wear jeans and sneakers like some women. Instead, I reveled in soft, feminine clothing like dresses or lounge pajamas paired with sexy footwear. Our house, an upscale log cabin, featured hardwood floors, which I adored. It was designed like an A-frame, with large dormers on either side that housed the bedrooms and bathrooms, plus a loft upstairs. Though there were rugs, I enjoyed hearing the click of my heels on the hardwood, a reminder of my femininity. Just because I lived in the country didn't mean I couldn't be stylish or sexy. Alex seemed to appreciate my efforts, too. In fact, he had become a bit less self-centered and more considerate lately. Using my psychology background, I gently guided him to become a more attentive lover, which was my primary goal. I had no idea how much help I was actually getting, but I'll explain that soon. I didn't have much faith in the idea of spiking his food, though. On a whim, I sent samples of both the unfiltered and filtered water to an independent lab in the nearest city, which had a population of about 150,000. I was surprised by the results. Every drop of water we drank and every drop that fed our garden was infused with various female and phytohormones. No wonder the garden thrived. It also explained why Alex had begun to mellow. Of course, I knew that adding these hormones to my diet would help preserve my youth and beauty, as well as prevent bone loss and osteoporosis, but I wondered if they would affect Alex's youth and appearance too. It certainly seemed that way, especially when I looked at Taylor. He was becoming increasingly attractive. It was clear that the plant's discharge was impacting the stream, and even the fish we caught were laden with estrogenic compounds. With this new information, I made it my mission to get to know the wives, husbands, and children of several families living nearby, paying close attention to the appearances of their males when I met them. A couple of families had lived there for years and their men appeared quite round and sweet-natured. How interesting, I thought. Long-term effects. After some reflection, I realized that the wells in the area were also fed by the aquifer linked to the stream, which likely contained the same compounds, albeit in lesser amounts due to natural filtration through the ground. I began to observe Alex as discreetly as possible, taking stock of his appearance and attitudes with growing interest. While I wanted to train him, did I really want to transform my Adonis into a goddess, someone willing and able to engage with me on my level? It sounded like an oddly fun challenge. Oh, I could be quite devilish sometimes. I questioned myself. Was it possible? Could I really do it? And what would the end result be? Could I turn my Adonis into an Aphrodite, as in some of those stories? It felt quirky to think that way, but it also excited me, and I loved a good challenge. I rationalized that since he lived here, drank the water, and worked at the plant, this transformation would eventually happen anyway. All I needed to do was accelerate the process. I convinced him to let me take a picture of him in his swim trunks for later comparison. Through my observations and a close inspection of the photo, I noticed he had indeed begun to soften, not only in mindset due to my carefully chosen suggestions but also in physique. His muscles were losing their definition, and his stomach no longer had that six-pack look. He was becoming smooth, like a girl. I couldn't help but notice that he seemed to have a newfound appreciation for my expressions of femininity, including my sexy lingerie, nighties, and high heels. Whenever we went out, even just to the local movies, I dressed up instead of down, and he seemed to enjoy my efforts. He became more expressive, telling me he liked seeing me in dresses and even starting to voice opinions, something he had never done during our courtship. He began commenting on my clothing and shoes. Whenever Taylor came over for dinner or spent the weekend with us, he received the same treatment I was giving Alex. I was unintentionally blocking boy hormones and boosting girl hormones through the meals I prepared. We started to engage in more girl talk, and Alex began to listen and absorb the conversations, even if it was unconsciously at first. Meanwhile, Taylor was beginning to blossom in his own right. He was becoming quite cute from a guy's perspective. It was amusing to see, and surprisingly, he seemed comfortable with it, which made me curious about his dad. I felt compelled to meet him one day. As Alex became a bit softer, he also became a better lover. This led me to think that if a little was good, then more must be better, so I began adding an extra quarter teaspoon of my compound to all his meals. It didn't take long before that decision showed real promise, as I soon noticed more pronounced changes in him. After only about 6 weeks on the increased dosage, he began to shift slightly toward that goddess-like figure I had envisioned in those stories. His demeanor was becoming a bit more buoyant, much like Taylor's, and I noticed that his areolas were expanding. We were in the big city, and I was getting my hair and nails done. Alex had decided to take that time to grab a part for our rototiller, But after about an hour, he showed up at the salon, sitting in a chair and casually flipping through the available reading materials. I doubt I need to explain what those materials were. Not exactly hot rod. He had his nose buried in Cosmopolitan. Whenever I glanced his way, he seemed genuinely absorbed. How interesting. I made a mental note to ask him casually later about what he'd been reading, and my mind started to plot. Before we left, I suggested he get his other ear pierced and have his nails done, and he surprisingly agreed with ease. His hair wasn't long yet, just grazing his ears and collar, but it was thick and full. With the additives he was receiving, he was unlikely to go bald. I didn't want to push my luck, so I suggested tiny gold studs instead. While we walked around the mall shopping, I noticed several guys with double hoops, some quite large or heavy, and even a couple of masculine types with dangling earrings. I mentioned how I thought that look was appealing and would suit him well. Then I let it go. He took the bait, or maybe it was the new chemical balance in his body. Either way, my baby was on the path to becoming more handsome than we had ever imagined. He even commented on how he thought the hoops looked good on a guy with similar hair to his. Laura did a fantastic job on his nails, not too feminine, and I made sure to tell her not to cut them. At first, he faced a bit of teasing at work about the earrings, but it quickly faded. After all, he had been a macho track star and was well respected. Once he told me the teasing had stopped, I gifted him a nice pair of small 1/2 genuine gold hoops, which he accepted without hesitation and wore all the time. From that small beginning, everything seemed to progress naturally. Well, perhaps not completely naturally, but you get the idea. Slowly but surely, Alex began to bloom. His once rock-hard physique started to take on gentler contours. He remained strong, but I could see the subtle transformation. His chest, which had been defined, was now softer, with more pronounced, larger brown areolas. His ego also began to shift. He started taking better care of his skin and hair and allowed his hair to grow longer. He even picked up some rather feminine mannerisms when it came to his hair, and I noticed my skin lotion and beauty soap disappearing more quickly. Alex and Taylor got along famously, and there was nothing Taylor could say that would keep Alex out of the conversation. Finally, I asked Alex about his reading in Cosmopolitan the last time we were at the salon. He replied, "Oh, it was just something about what's in for shoes, dresses, and hair for next spring. I think the spring styles are going to be really pretty." Well now, by the time I was ready for another perm, Alex needed a haircut. I made an appointment for him to get a trim at my salon, but much to our surprise, it turned into a wash and perm instead. Alex found himself with curlers in his hair under the dryer beside me. The stylist was so taken with his hair that she convinced him to do something stylish with it. It was theoretically a unisex salon, but there were rarely any men there. It was adorable seeing Alex under the dryer next to me, getting another manicure. When we were done and he looked in the mirror, it was clear he liked what he saw. I noticed he was beginning to lean more towards a Alexa or Kathy rather than a Alex. He was definitely getting cuter, and the poor guy was puzzled about why he was gaining a little weight as his body started to lose its sinewy definition. He still had a hearty appetite, but it was being deposited nicely for my purposes as his metabolism began to slow, allowing lovely fat to settle on his thighs, butt, hips, and chest. The salon seemed like a great starting point for my efforts to domesticate him. So, even though it was more effort for me, I stopped getting perms and started going in for a wash and set every couple of weeks, enticing him to join me with whatever excuse I could come up with. He never refused, and soon he became comfortable there, getting to know the stylists and engaging with them in a more feminine manner, I might add. He began reading fashion and women's magazines, and whenever we sat under the dryers together, I noticed him lingering on articles about hair, makeup, and nail care. It wasn't long before Laura would finish my manicure and Alex would be getting one too at every visit, as she gently teased him into it. I had never really noticed before, but he had rather slender hands and feet for a man, and Laura always applied a couple of coats of hardener and a top coat, making his nails shine. Of course, she rounded his nails as they grew longer and consistently pushed back his cuticles. When it came to nails, she was on autopilot after all. A hand deserved to be pretty, I guess.
Works for Emmy.
I had become quite friendly with Laura and decided to ask her if she had noticed any changes in Alex since I started bringing him in. Unsurprisingly, she said yes, and I noticed a playful twinkle in her eyes, reminiscent of my own. I shared a couple of website addresses with her, and without further discussion, except for a wink the next time we came in, she began doing Alex's manicures just like mine, allowing his nails to grow a little longer and rounder. He would always examine them like a man does with a clenched fist after she was done, but she corrected him, showing him how to appreciate his manicures with an open, relaxed hand. I now had a co-conspirator. How delightful. We exchanged email addresses and occasionally discussed Alex's progress. Yes, she did think he was taking on a more feminine appearance, albeit subtly. Since she had known him in high school, she had a good basis for comparison. She bluntly asked me if I was intentionally feminizing him, and since I enjoyed having someone else in on the secret, I confessed that I was indeed working toward that goal because I preferred my men less macho. I didn't divulge all the specifics about the internet, as that could be compromised, but Laura understood Alex's ego and believed it would be beneficial for him. She expressed her willingness to help in any way she could. As we began to visit the city more frequently, I started engaging Alex in conversations while window shopping. I discovered he had learned quite a bit from his reading and was developing a feminine vocabulary, knowledge, and clear opinions about styles and fabrics. How wonderful, I thought. We now had a new common ground for conversation beyond the usual husband and wife banter. He also had an eye for pretty shoes. As we explored various shops, I explained the feel and texture of different fabrics, and I could see him gaining an appreciation for these soft, feminine things as I encouraged him to touch various materials. I decided to be as subtle as possible, even though I was fascinated by the idea of truly feminizing him like the stories I had read. My next step involved introducing other jewelry. For his birthday, I got him a nice bracelet and necklace, not the chunky masculine pieces but rather delicate ones. I also bought him a pair of zircon dangle earrings. I began wearing the sexiest lingerie and high heels I could find, making sure to flaunt my best wiggle whenever he was watching. This made me a bit taller than him. Alex started to express his appreciation for my efforts with knowledgeable comments like, "I think those blue Diorcy pumps would look great with that dress, honey." I secretly hoped he would feel a hint of jealousy regarding my femininity. As the summer of our second year on the land approached, my patience was rewarded. He could now differentiate between an empire waist and a regular one, an A-line skirt and a full one, and knew the proper names for various styles of footwear and lingerie. I had made special efforts to enhance his appreciation for the feel of nylon and satin, particularly. One day, I noticed him reading an article titled How to Please Your Man, which discussed clothing and the best ways to wear it, including some suggestions for the bedroom in a tasteful manner. I knew I had to read that article too to understand what he might expect, so before he could hint at it, I handed it to him. I began to pleasure him in ways I would like to be pleasured myself. I also started to seduce him by prancing around in hosiery and heels, wearing a teddy or chemise, flaunting my femininity as suggested in the article, which really turned him on as he ran his hands all over me. He snagged my hose once, so I made him start using hand lotion regularly in addition to his thoroughly feminine manicures, resulting in soft, delicate hands. As I grew friendlier with my female neighbors, I decided to ask them to share their family albums with me. Most women enjoy sharing those, so I got to see their men and sons as they matured and changed. Without exception, they all exhibited a certain femininity in their appearance, if not outright girlishness, especially when I met them in person. They all seemed to start off normally when they moved here, only to gradually transform. As I got to know some of them better, it became clear that the local water had influenced the boys significantly. One baby boy was born with breasts, which can happen if the mother's hormones are unbalanced, and how could they not be? A couple of the young boys were quite pretty, which I'm sure led to their share of challenges, and they behaved a lot like girls, refusing to let their hair be cut. One woman, Samantha, showed me a picture of her eldest child, Lee, who had moved to the city before we arrived and was now 20. I hadn't realized, based on the name and appearance, that Lee was a boy, and I remarked on how attractive she looked and what a nice figure she had in that bikini. Samantha visibly blushed and informed me that Lee was her son, who was now living as the girl he appeared to be. They had been in the area for 20 years and had raised their 4 kids there. Having lived in a couple of large cities in her youth, Samantha seemed quite accepting of the situation. I asked her how her husband felt about it, and instead of giving me a straightforward answer, she showed me a picture of him in a well-fitted bikini, showcasing a generous amount of cleavage when he was around 30. He had a really cute face and figure. Samantha, this is your husband. I mean, I can see he has matured a bit, and he does seem a little curvy for a guy. I bet he'd look adorable all dolled up. How did this happen? Tell me everything. It seemed that Samantha hadn't really shared all of this with anyone before, though her children had grown up aware of it. Matthew, now 11 and starting to develop bumps, was probably heading in the same direction as Lee. She appeared grateful to have someone to talk to about it all. I don't fully understand it either, Peg, but my husband and sons are just as feminine in appearance and tastes as my daughters. Naturally, when Terry began to show obvious signs of femininity, we had his blood tested. We did the same for Lee, and the entire family has the same hormones flowing through us, though the boys have them to a lesser extent. Now that Lee is living as a girl, she is taking large doses of female hormones and plans to have surgery when she turns 21. She even has a steady boyfriend. She doesn't have a masculine thought in her pretty head. It's been very hard for me to relate to her as a boy for many years now. It was quite unsettling at first, but I grew accustomed to Terry's transition and actually enjoyed having him truly understand me. Then Lee changed too, and I had to accept it. She really is pretty, isn't she? She's lovely, Samantha. You have nothing to be ashamed of, and Terry is quite cute, whether as a middle-aged man or a woman. Does he still have that figure? To be honest, Peg, I think he looks better in a dress and heels than I do. You mean he dresses as a woman too? Yes, for years now, especially since Lee started to look and act more like a girl. We finally decided to let him follow his heart and dress that way. He was just being himself. Terry always wears ladies' lingerie, and Anne and Lorraine have fully accepted their daddy as Terry with an I instead of a Y. I don't know how that will affect their future relationships when they get married, but as Terry changed, we had no choice but to embrace the new she in our lives. The girls only see their daddy dressed as a man when he has no other option. His bosom is quite hard to hide, and they've gotten used to seeing him in nighties. He's a C-cup now. All of us wear nighties now, even Bobby. We go to the city as 5 girls all the time. Now that you know, maybe he will relax and let you meet her. I'd love that. This is all quite fascinating because Alex seems to be changing too, and you're the first person I'm sharing this with as well. His body used to be so hard, but now he is becoming quite smooth and rounded, and it seems like he's developing a bosom and hips. I wonder if he would like to try wearing something girlish too. I was teasing a little, preparing her for the future when Alex, if I had my way, would become Alexa or Kathy. I had read many more stories on the net by now and found other websites, and frankly, sometimes I caught myself in compromising positions with my left hand as I read those transformation stories. I also got some great ideas from them. That's a tough one, Peg, but if it looks like a girl, it would probably enjoy dressing like one too, she said with a giggle. You wouldn't mind if my Alexney looked or dressed girlishly around your kids? I don't have room for discrimination in this house, Peg. The kids are used to girlish guys, and it won't be long before Bobby will need a girl's swimsuit too. There's no doubt he'll end up a girl. His masculinity isn't developing at all. Why not test the waters and see if he'd like something girlish to wear, maybe a nightie, panties, or a camisole? I've noticed how pretty his hair and hands are, and his earrings. He's a lot cuter than he used to be, she said with a giggle. He could probably be a cute girl if he wanted. You know, Laura at the salon mentioned something similar to me the other day. I lied. It was important to lay a foundation before building a house, after all. That could be fun. If he's going to embrace his girlish side, he might as well enjoy some of the perks, right? Just like Terry. If he doesn't outright reject it, you might just have yourself a new girlfriend, she replied, a hint of concern in her voice. And if his body is changing, his mind likely is too. I learned that the hard way. My Terry is incredibly feminine and seems to understand exactly what I'm thinking and feeling. It's really quite lovely. I do want him to be happy, and he does seem to have a newfound appreciation for femininity lately. Okay, I'll keep you posted on how things go. We finished our coffee, and I drove home, pondering my new ally. It had to be the discharge from the plant affecting their household. From my studies, I knew that males and females process information differently. I started to wonder if there was a way to inhibit his body from utilizing male hormones, so I typed testosterone blocker into a few search engines. It didn't take long to find what I needed. I couldn't buy it at the store, but I could order it online from overseas, which I did, and it was incorporated into the mix when it arrived a couple of weeks later. As summer approached and new styles emerged, styles that Alex had read about, I decided to test the waters during our mall outings. I wanted some new sandals, so we visited a self-service shoe store where we both picked out a pair. Alex had never been one for sandals before, but these were fairly generic, not too flashy, and they came from the ladies section. He really liked how they looked on his petite size 8 feet. They were a medium tan color with a chunky wedge heel. I spotted a waltz-length gown that I thought would look adorable on him and bought it without revealing my intentions, knowing the image in the mirror would astonish him as he saw his blossoming curves in the flowing fabric. I remembered what Samantha had said and figured that if he didn't react negatively to my suggestion about wearing the gown, we were on the right path. Tonight was the night. I laid out the gown on his side of the bed. When we climbed the stairs and he found it there, he picked it up and noticeably fondled it for a few seconds, clearly enjoying the feel of the fabric as he asked why I had left my gown on his side. It was now or never time, so I jumped in. It had been a couple of weeks since I cut off his testosterone supply, and besides, he was rounding out quite nicely. Well, sweetheart, I know how much you enjoy nylon on Emmy, and it's really comfortable to sleep in. I thought you might like to try it. Would you wear it for a night? There's no way I should even be considering this, Peg. I know, but you are considering it, aren't you? Yes, I admit I've wondered what it would be like to wear something light and pretty, and you look so good in your hose, heels, and chemise. I love that look. It's very sexy. I had him. We can always talk about you trying those on later, sweetheart, if you'd like. Ignoring my comment as if he hadn't even heard it, he slipped out of his boy clothes and let the gown glide down his body. Goosebumps immediately covered him, and he tented in 3 places. Oh, I said, I think it looks darling on you, but you'd better take care of that. Here's a pair of stretch panties to keep that bump in check. He put them on and tucked himself away. Go take a look, honey. He did, and the look on his face was priceless. He immediately tucked himself away again. Damn, Peg. See? It feels nice too, I bet. Yes, it really does, but I think I'm growing breasts. Maybe you are. Haven't they provided you with pleasure when I nibble and nurse on you? In ways I'll never understand, Peggy. I feel so unusual lately. Well, just enjoy your new nightie, honey, and we'll explore how deep those feelings go as we continue. To say we had a good time that night would be an understatement. He was incredibly turned on, and after we were done and he had cleaned up, my offer of another pair of panties to sleep in was met with no resistance. One day, I would have a sweetie like Terry. It would just take time, but now that we had crossed this first hurdle, I knew we could move ahead a bit faster. Since we only went into the city on Saturdays, that morning was Sunday. Alex awoke to me teasingly running my long fingernails over his panty-clad bottom with one hand while making little circles around his expanding areolas with the other. Oh, that feels nice, Peg, and so does the gown. I feel so feminine. Hell, I like it. Well then, darling, We should get you some nice sexy lingerie of your own. It would be thrilling to see you in it too, and you feel absolutely delicious. I then pounced on him and playfully felt him up. I should be ashamed of myself. You drive a hard bargain, Peggy. I can't believe I enjoy the sensation of slinky, feminine nylon so much, he said. I made sure his nightie stayed laundered that week and that he always had fresh panties to wear to bed. I was attentive to his chest and bottom, though I did tease him about his hairy legs, just a subtle hint. I didn't press the issue, I merely planted a seed and watered it once during the week. One night, I noticed him looking at his hairy legs in the mirror, but I said nothing. He frowned, which was enough for me. Meanwhile, to add fuel to the fire, Taylor was coming over regularly, and girl talk was rampant. Taylor was now wearing a lot of obviously feminine clothing, and his body shape had really changed. He wore a sports bra that he was trying poorly to conceal, and he had become so girlish that I accidentally slipped and called him Tara one day. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Taylor," I started to say, but he quickly cut me off. "Honestly, hun, I feel much more like a Tara lately, so it's fine with me if it's okay with Alexney," he replied, looking questioningly at Alex. "I, don't have a way to back out of this, do I?" "Guess not, Alex. We've known each other a while." "Okay, Tara it is then, and heaven help us." US. "Oh boy. Yes, us, Tara. Apparently, it's contagious, and I must have it too, but please, try to keep it to yourself, alright?" "Oh sure, Alexney. Of course." I thought to myself, yeah, right. The following Saturday, after our hair appointments, which had left his nails a bit longer and more feminine thanks to a heads-up I gave Laura, his hair was prettier than ever. We shopped together, and he was embarrassed by his newly acknowledged feelings and appearance, but he let me buy him a couple more gowns, a half-dozen pairs of panties, and even a pair of gold-colored wedge-heeled mules with about a 2 or 2.5 heel. Since his new sandals had a 1.5 wedge heel, it wasn't much of a stretch to go for something slightly higher. I also got him a housecoat. While I enjoyed seeing his chest through the gown, I knew there would be times when he'd only be wearing panties, a bra, and the robe and mules. Alex stopped wearing his boy briefs after the first week. He now wore panties all the time, keeping just one pair for doctor visits. His drawer was filled with pretty panties, and I didn't have to worry about putting the seat down anymore, it was always down. What a nice change. I hadn't even thought about that. He was becoming a squatter. Alex had fallen in love with his girlish sleepwear, the robe, and slippers, and he was definitely turned on by his nylon garments. He began to spend more time in them, sometimes wearing them for a couple of hours on weekends while getting ready in the morning or before bed at night. His walk took on a different flavor as his heels clicked on the hardwood floors. My seduction outfit of chemise, hose, and heels was also getting to him. I could almost sense him imagining how that might look and feel on him. Once I knew he had accepted these changes, I gave him a pedicure, applying rosy polish and some drying oil. He was already in his favorite gown, the one with the lacy bodice and hem, complete with a ribbon woven through the bodice. When he slipped his feet back into his slippers, I asked, "Like them?" "Aha. It sort of fits whatever it is I'm becoming, I guess." "Are you sure this doesn't bother you, Peg? We can forget it. I think. Tell me you don't love it, and we'll stop." "I can't do that. I think I do love it." "Well then, honey, I suppose I'll just have to get used to your enjoyment of a little femininity in your life." "It's okay, really. I don't mind. It's just clothing, after all." "All right, you asked for it," he replied with a touch of resolution. Maybe it was resignation I heard, but he didn't sound unhappy. Yes, I did ask for it, and it was working nicely. I kept Laura updated, and she was fascinated. It was challenging to keep her in the loop while at the salon, so I started sending her encrypted emails. It had taken me a long time to get him this far, but now we were shopping every week for pretty things. I continued to bring him along slowly, but I sensed he wanted to try out my seduction outfit. The following week, I picked up some prettier earrings, a couple of bracelets, and a ring. I could feel his excitement building, so I asked him straight out if he'd like to try that outfit himself. I wish you could have seen his reaction. Could I really, Peg? You wouldn't mind, really? You think I'd look cute in a teddy, hose, and pumps? Well, yes, but on one condition. What's that? You have to get rid of all your body hair, honey. It ruins the look and would look awful in hose. Besides, your pretty things will feel much nicer against smooth skin. Yes, I know. All right, I'll do it. We got him a rose-colored chemise and panty set, some thigh-high hose by Jacqueline Smith, and some knee-highs, which I had Alex put on under his socks in the men's room. Then we returned to the shoe store and found a pair of black patent 3.5 spikes for him. Oh, he was so nervous. He worried about this and that, but he finally tried them on. He got a little excited right there, just a small reaction, but it was enough. His response had diminished since he had been off his boy hormones for a month now. I noticed that part of him was shrinking and becoming less responsive as he was expanding in other areas and continuing to smooth out as a layer of fat built up beneath his skin. His complexion was changing too. He was looking quite cute lately, and I was eager to see how pretty he had become as I prepared to paint that canvas. I taught him how to put on his hose and walk in heels, rotating his hips and taking small steps. He had already been swishing in his mules, but the spikes made for a much sexier stride. It didn't take him long to master it, and soon we were both getting dolled up in chemises, hose, and heels. He didn't even need to look at me to feel turned on. We were wild. He started to turn himself on, becoming a bit limp-wristed all the time. He began to act and speak like he was dressed like another Tara. In fact, Tara and Alex had become best friends. We kept our hose, heels, and chemises on during lovemaking, and he was coming from a different place now, feeling very stimulated by the clothing. We got him another pair of heels, some flats, and a few pairs of women's slacks. I suggested it was time for a bra, and he offered little resistance. After we got her into her first bra and adjusted her new curves, she nearly toppled off her heels. Now was the moment. I sat my new Alexa down and began teaching her about makeup, which she eagerly absorbed. Are you enjoying this side of you now, Alexa? Is that my new name? If you like it. I do. Then I christened the Alexa, and from now on, that shall be your name. I touched her shoulders with the curling iron in a symbolic gesture, and we both smiled. Then she turned and gave me a moist kiss. It was a sweet moment. For something I never knew was inside me, I have to admit it's the most delightful thing I've ever experienced. I can't describe the feelings, and I just seem to want more and more. Is this what being a girl feels like? I don't know how you feel, honey, but the trappings are definitely part of it. Lingerie and pretty clothes aren't just for guys to admire. We love wearing them for ourselves. Would you like to have some lovely dresses, blouses, and skirts? Oh, Peggy, this is so terrible for me to put you through this. I can't control these feminine desires all of a sudden. Yes, I want to dress in pretty things. Oh, this is awful. Nonsense, darling. You clearly need to express your feminine side. Every guy has one. I don't want you running around frustrated, risking a stroke or heart attack. Let's measure you. Well, that was a revelation for both of us. Alexa now needed a 34B bra, so a push-up B would create nice cleavage. Her waist measured 27 inches, and her hips had expanded to 35. She was roughly a size 11, but I suspected she was still growing. I was only a size 9, so would need to find her own clothes. The following week, our savings account took a hit for a couple of $100. When we arrived at the salon, I wish you could have seen the looks on the girls' faces. Alexa had definitely been christened in my mind and had come out wearing a simple, tailored blouse with her bra and a cami underneath. She paired it with slacks and flats, complemented by basic makeup without foundation and big hoops. They gushed over her, and I finally had to tell them the new name I had chosen for her as I reintroduced her to the staff. She left the salon with a convertible haircut, freshly tinted nail polish, and professionally applied makeup. She was astonished by her reflection. A few pictures were taken, and while she was grinning from ear to ear, her eyes were welling up. It was another sweet moment. "You're really going to be a doll, Alexa, honey. Why don't you just stop pretending to be Alex at home and enjoy yourself? Would that be okay with you? Honey, you're either going to work this out of your system, or you're going to integrate it into your life. One way or another, you have to figure it out. You're not alone, you know." I had just dropped a bombshell. "I don't understand. What do you mean I'm not alone?" "I mean Terry Walker from down the road, not just Tara." "What about him?" "He's more of a she, like you seem to want to be, and has been for over 10 years. You two should connect and compare notes. It might be fun to have another girlfriend like yourself to talk to." "Oh, Peg. I couldn't. We'd both be too embarrassed. Tara is one thing, but a neighbor. You might be doubtful, but Terry has been living as a woman during her off-duty hours for years. The family is quite accustomed to it. They go out as 5 girls all the time." "No way." "Yes. You've never met their son, Lee. He lives in the city, but he isn't a he anymore either, and Matthew, well, you know, I thought that boy was awfully girlish. What's going on around here? Witchcraft?" "Nothing like that, I'm sure, but boys do seem to enjoy becoming girls. It makes you feel good, doesn't it?" "I'm ashamed of how much I like it, Peg. I'm even beginning to appreciate my breasts and butt and wanting them to grow. Isn't that terrible?" "Don't worry, dear. They will grow, and no, it's not terrible, just delightfully unconventional and liberating. I love being a girl. It's a much more civilized lifestyle, and I'm sure you will love it too." It took me another month to convince my now fully embraced girlish husband to join me at the Walkers for dessert one evening. Alexa and Terry's initial meeting was quite awkward, as Alexa was shy and afraid to fully embrace her new identity, but she gradually started to come out of her shell, and she and Terry got along well. Terry wore a lovely house dress appropriate for daytime outings, paired with mid-heeled sandals, while Alexa opted for a skirt, blouse, and mid-heels. After enjoying pie and ice cream, we decided to play some cards. The kids joined us for dessert. They stared at first but quickly got used to the sight of 4 ladies playing euchre. We lost, but the conversation took a familiar turn for Samantha and me. We wrapped up the evening around 9.